Alright, so for some reason my demo of this didn't properly sync with YouTube or get loaded up, so I've given up on that going up there, so I'll just do another one here for you guys quickly, again, just to show you the few kind of basics of shading and blending. So first I'll start out with a nice light 4H pencil. Notice here I'm starting with my grip down on the lower part of it, so that here when I start to draw the circle, kind of filling it out, I'm drawing with my shoulder so I can go around the whole thing in one motion. Right? I can make much kind of looser and broader strokes rather than drawing up here while I'll get, my wrist can't make I can't do a whole circle really, right? But here at least, well, the smaller one I guess I could, right? But up here this is too large for me to do so. Again, it's a good idea to start very lightly, and again, grip your pencil further down on the kind of at the base, so that you kind of can do large strokes with your shoulder. So here, the kneaded eraser we discussed in class, so this is actually two of them put together, but this is nice because I can form it into a point if I need to, like that, right? I just do a little bit there, as I can rub it like I would a vinyl eraser, but it also allows me to, here I'll do it on this finished sphere. Again, it was a short demo, but I can press it in and I can just lift it off of a certain spot, right? So rather than rubbing against it, if I just needed to do kind of very precise erasing, so I can just touch that, lift it up, and then I can see it'll get dirty there on the tip. I just pull it over, now I got a nice clean, now I have a nice clean bit to do again. So let's go to this circle a bit. So now that I kind of sketch it out, I can decide which kind of where inside all those very light sketchy marks the circle is actually going to be. So like I did for this one, I'm not going to make this a like a portfolio piece or something. I'll just give you the basics. I'm not going to worry about getting it perfectly round or anything like that, but just show you kind of the approach to it and the basics here. All right, that's close enough. All right, so now I'm going to start with, again, holding it down, and I'm actually going to lay it on the side, so I'm getting at the broad edge of the graphite. I want to lay down a middle tone. I think I may have mentioned in class that typically I will draw in my own practice on tone paper, particularly gray paper. It's a little bit harder to find, whole sketch pads of tone paper. White is much more common, so that's what I had you guys get. But the advantage of using a tone sheet of paper, whether you get a pad or just individual sheets, is that your middle tone, your midtones, are the paper already. So you can use, like you would typically do with the graphite or charcoal, whatever you want to draw with. You can of course darken it and put in darker tones, but you can also use chalk pencils and add in light tones. But here, since I'm using it's kind of a cream colored paper, but a white sheet of paper here, I'm going to have to put in my middle tone. So here, a very easy, simple tool, if you're on a budget for blending, is your fingertip, right? You'll see as I do this more, I'll start to build up some graphite on my finger. But another tool is, and for more precise blending, is this what's called a tortillon, but a blending stick. Now this has been worn down quite a bit. This should come to a point just like the pencil does, but here this already has some dark on it from doing this one. So you can see here, if I wanted to use this, I would kind of need to rub some of that excess off and clean it a little bit. But you can see here it's a good way to blend and get a nice even tone. And even here I can use some of this to start to add in some of the darker midtones as I'm blending in those letter marks I was just making with my 4H. Now notice here, both as I'm blending and as I was shading, I'm not going up and down, and I'm not going side to side, and I'm not going kind of in straight lines. I'm going around the form. Even though I'm going to here in this one, because this is what I asked you guys to do for your assignment, kind of remove and obliterate as much of the pencil line as possible and get a smooth gradation. I'm still working around the form, one, because quite simply, I want the shadows are going to fall across, I guess, as you see here, in kind of round groupings, because it's going over the curved surface. But also, it just helps me keep in mind, that I'm drawing a curved surface. So typically what I would do in my own drawing practice is I would shade, put in tone with cross hatches like this, where the marks both add tone or value, but also describe the surface. And probably sometime this semester I'll show you some of my own drawings so you can see that, but it's a pretty common way to do it. So now that I'm starting to get the middle tone there, I'll just add in the cast shadow here briefly. So of course my lighting is coming from this direction, right? So I'll start to get progressively darker. So since I've now laid down this middle tone, I can use that as a starting off point to start to add in a wider range of tone and of value. And I'll show you why here in a moment, why it's very helpful to get that middle ground on there just as a starting point. Even though it's not quite middle, that was a pretty light beginning stage, but that's just how I typically work. I work very light. So here this assignment is for graphite, but again in my own practice I would use, here I'm using a 2H, but typically I would start with either a 4 or even a 6H, even on that toned gray paper, to do my underdrawing, kind of, the contours and figuring out the proportions of things and the placement on the paper. And then I would do this cross-hatching the tone with charcoal pencils. So I actually had to dig around a little bit so I'll use in this drawing for you, I'll use 4H, 2H, 2B, and an 8B for the very darkest parts. So here I'm just refining the edge a little bit more, and again I can see where this edge is getting a little bit smudged from just blending it with my finger. I can use my kneaded eraser, get a nice sharp edge on it, just clean that right up and sharpen it up. All right, so that first pass I did, I was really kind of touching the page as lightly as I could. So here I'll do a little bit, put a little bit more force on it as I'm drawing here to get, again, a darker bit. And on the other video that's probably already posted on YouTube, I kind of described what I'm thinking here with where I'm putting these shadows and how the light's falling across the surface. But and so here you can see I'm getting a pretty clear separation there, where one tone and then the next. In order to help myself blend that, I still with the same 2H pencil, just kind of do a tone that crosses over that core shadow I'm starting to represent, and just space the lines out a little bit more, space the marks I'm making out a bit more, so that when I go to blend it, I've already started to do a little bit of the blending with the pencil themselves. Since this sphere is going to be so small, I might use my twirl on a bit more here, my blending stick. Alright, so again, I'll move up to a 2B here. And so I want to build kind of light to dark. It's easier to make things darker than it is to lighten them up. And as you'll see when I get into the 8B and start to do the cast shadows, so here I moved up to a 2B. What I'm doing here is, so since I've got that mid-tone on there, that's helping me kind of judge how dark everything else should be as I'm working up. The relationship of these values is important. You don't want to think of this as you're drawing here, both in this project or the future ones, or really any drawing. Habit, or kind of a trap many students or kind of beginning artists will, kind of a bad habit, they'll think of these, you know, the sections here of the value here. I've marked these kind of longitude lines or latitude lines here, whatever. They'll think of it, okay, you know, here's a little sketch of it, right? Kind of outlining each part of each kind of different value and almost approaching it as though they're assembling a quilt or a puzzle and just doing one piece and then the next piece and the next. That's not a good habit to be in, or a good way to think of it. It's better to think of, you know, approach it as a whole unit. Kind of don't let any one part get finished to, you know, get too far ahead of another part, and kind of develop your drawings at a equal pace, right? Where one little section isn't finished, or you're not, again, thinking of it like you're assembling a puzzle or a quilt or something with little kind of blocks of tone or value, because they all need to relate to one another, as you'll see coming up here in a moment. Actually, don't need to erase that bit there, but whatever, there we go. Because again, even this 2B, I'm using it quite lightly. It'll be easy to erase and also easy to blend in as I go darker here. So now I've got a decent start here. The core shadow needs to be darker to help get the sense of how it's curving around this way, but I'll do that with an 8B coming up and also start to lay in some of the cast shadow there. But I'm starting to get a decent effect here of light curving around and then going back down here and then catching the reflected light there at the bottom, right? But to help build this illusion, I need to push the tones further. I'm going to jump up now to an 8B, which here I started on the cast shadow. So right now I'm pressing a little bit lighter than you would if you were, you know, just, you know, writing a note or something. I'm trying to be pretty light here to begin with, and you can see still how dark it is comparatively. So here where I'm describing, you know, just where the shadow's falling on a flat surface, it's fine to use straight lines, since that's just still describing the surface at the table. So now here I'll go a little bit darker, because I wanted to I didn't want to go too dark too early, but so I want to see here, kind of, again, laying a base tone down as a reference. So now that I can see that, I want it to be a little bit darker. Well, here, first notice that now that I have this dark shadow underneath it, look at how light the light shadow appears. Obviously I haven't made it any lighter, but it's just a contrast between this darker tone and this darker tone. Now that it's pinched in there, you see how truly light it is. Now a good rule of thumb is that your lightest shadow is always darker than your darkest light. So it's a little bit of a, not quite a tongue twister, but like a riddle, where even down here where it's lighter, where this reflected light is going to be lighter here than the shadow, it still has to be darker than my darkest lights up here, because light is actually directly hitting this. Or down here, it's going to be lighter than the core shadow, but by necessity, it has to be darker than up here because it's receiving less light. So you can see here as I'll start to make the shadow a little bit darker. So now I'm using about the pressure that I would if I was writing a letter or something. Getting darker, and so you can see how as I do this appears to be getting brighter and brighter, but obviously it's not. I'm not even touching it. What's happening is your eye is just comparing it in context with the tones around it. So by comparison, it seems to be quite light, even though a moment ago before I started adding that shadow, it didn't appear to be so bright, but now you can get a better sense of it. Alright, so let me put in some of the core shadow here. So again, I've already described in this video kind of why the core shadows exist, what causes them, why they're useful to, why you want to make sure you're including them in your drawings, not just as spheres, but of any rounded or curved surface. This core shadow is, and the contrast here, getting a nice range. I'm only using, what am I using, 4 pencils here, but again, it's just a quick demo for you. But getting a full range of values is really important in making really convincing drawings. Just having a wider, you can make it look really dramatic and really impress the viewer, but also really make a convincing